Game development is one of my favorite hobbies, but I found one of the hardest steps of game design is figuring out what to actually make. It can be really difficult to come up with creative and unique game ideas, and when starting out, it's something I'd struggle with a lot, and still often do today. But over the years, I picked up some different methods, so these are my top 3 ways to come up with fun and interesting game ideas. My first tip is to play lots of games and see what makes them tick. You've probably already played tons of games throughout your lifetime, so start by looking at some of your favorites. Try running through all the games in your Steam library and think about all the reasons you enjoy playing these games. Maybe you really like a certain genre, like platformers or racing games, maybe something even more specific like roguelikes or Metroidvanias, or perhaps you really like a certain system or mechanic. Some of my favorites include the gun boots in Downwell, the focus system in Hollow Knight, or any game with a well-designed grappling hook. It will probably help to look at the types of games that you could realistically create on your own. If you want ideas for simple games, you could look online at different browser-based games. Play some free games on itch.io, or some old Flash games on Cool Math Games, or even just some old retro arcade games. There's a ton of free ones online. But this doesn't mean you can't draw inspiration from bigger AAA titles as well. Just don't set your hopes on recreating them. You can get great ideas for different styles, settings, and themes. Maybe create a game set in the time frame of the Old West, or in the distant future in a post-apocalyptic world. By drawing inspiration from what you already enjoy, you can easily create hundreds of game ideas. But they won't be any use to you at all unless you do tip number 2, which is to write down and organize your thoughts. Pick whatever method is best suited for you. Maybe that's good old-fashioned pen and paper, or the built-in notes app on your phone. My personal favorite is to use a program called Obsidian, which is a markdown text editor. It lets you create links between different notes, and you can even view them in this super cool graph view. I absolutely love it. But once you start writing things down, you can begin to make connections between your ideas. For example, one of my favorite genres of games is roguelikes, which stem from the 1980 dungeon crawling game, Rogue. It's a turn-based game with randomly generated rooms and enemies. Another game I wrote down was Bomberman, which has bombs that detonate on a timer. Combining these two ideas, I created a turn-based game with randomly generated rooms and enemies, but the player automatically places down bombs that detonate on a timer, forcing them to make quick decisions. Another reason you want to write down your ideas is because you never know when inspiration is going to strike. I always just keep one note that's just a huge list of ongoing game ideas, and I'll just pull out my phone and add to it whenever a good idea comes along. For example, one day I was watching Pirates of the Caribbean, and there's this one scene where they play this dice game called Liar's Dice. I looked up the rules and I tried playing it with my friends, and it was really fun. So I simply just wrote it down, and I didn't come back to it until over a year later. I was trying to come up with a game to make, and I read through my notes, and I thought it'd be really cool to make a single-player version of the game. So I made 3 different bots that the player plays against, each one more difficult than last, and I also put together a little tutorial to teach people how to play the game. But by just taking a quick moment to write down game ideas whenever they come to you, pretty soon you can have a huge stockpile of game ideas stored in your back pocket that you can use whenever you like. If you want to take a look at a bunch of game ideas I've been gathering for years, check out these 50 game ideas I would make if I had the time. After this video, of course. Now, this last tip is probably the most important of all, and it's to simply just make games. There's an amazing video I love on the subject from the wonderful channel Game Maker's Toolkit, and the underlying message is to stop waiting for the perfect game idea to come along and just get started building something. It's easy to look at a great game idea and think it was created in some brilliant moment of inspiration that smoothly transitioned into the final game. This couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, great designers work through an iterative process of trial and error and seeing what works and what doesn't. Only by getting started actually building your game can you begin to experiment with new ideas and shape it into the final product. To add my own advice on top of this, it'd be to stop worrying about coming up with some groundbreaking game idea and just to have fun. For the past 3 summers, I've worked as a coding instructor teaching a ton of different engineering and programming related courses. It's actually why there's all these Vex videos on my channel, but time and time again, one of my favorite courses to teach was game design. And I'll tell you what, kids do not have trouble coming up with game ideas. Why? Because they just want to have fun. They just want to play. All the games I'm showing on screen were made by different students I've taught over the years, all of which were only completed in just a day or 2. And many of these games came from students without any programming experience before. It's inspiring to see students just think of something fun to make, and then make it. They weren't worried about coming up with some revolutionary game idea. They just wanted to make fun games. And because of this, I was inspired myself to just make a game. So I started on a basic space shooter game, but While I was making it, I thought it'd be really cool to add some power-ups. And I borrowed the idea from Galaga where you can get a second ship, but instead, I made it so that there was no limit to how many ships you could have, and that ended up being the most fun part of the game. And I never would have come up with this idea if I hadn't just started making the game in the first place. Now, another piece of common advice is to make rapid prototypes to quickly test out different game ideas. After all, why would you spend hours and hours creating different art, music, and effects if the basic game idea just isn't all that fun? And for the most part, this is pretty solid advice. For my own games, I usually only put in about 20% of the work into making the prototype, and I can abandon it after that if I don't like it. But that remaining 80% is polishing it up and making it eye-catching and presentable. But this isn't the only way to do things either. If you're just making games for fun or to learn, feel free to just dive straight into whatever looks most fun to do. Probably the best example of this kind of game development is Sebastian Leg. For his video game about a superhero doing chores, the first thing he worked on wasn't the main game loop, or the player movement, or even the enemies. It was, surprisingly, working on the forward and inverse kinematics for correctly rendering the vacuum hose. And then, a custom-made rope simulator for the extension cord physics, and then, even realistically simulating every particle of dust. It completely goes against the traditional way of doing things, and that's because his process is not so much about making a really fun game, but rather having a lot of fun making it. At the end of the video, he says, "It's really only fun to play for a minute or two at most, but I honestly had a lot of fun making it, so I'll count that as a success." And it's this mentality about focusing on the joy of creation that's allowed him to make games that are absolutely stunning to look at, because it's not really about the final result, but about the journey he takes by making them. So to summarize, by playing lots of games and analyzing them, you can get inspiration for tons of different genres, mechanics, and systems, as well as different styles, settings, and themes. But the best way to leverage these ideas is to write them down and organize your thoughts. Then you can start to see new connections between your thoughts and have an ever-growing supply of game ideas in your back pocket. But lastly, and most importantly, you should just make games. Just play around and follow the fun. You don't need to wait for that perfect game idea to just get started. If this video helped you out, don't forget to click the like button to help others find it, and feel free to subscribe so you can stay up to date with any new videos. And if you want to play any of my games, I've got them up on my website. Check out the links in the description. And if you want to see more on game design, check out these videos here. Thank you so much for watching.